Sandstorm and hail are not really rivaling weather effects in the same way sun and rain are, but they definitely feel more closely linked to one another than to either sun or rain. Sun and rain both operate in a very similar way. They buff the damage of a specific type, nerf the damage of other types, and also activate similar synergistic abilities. Sand and hail, on the other hand, do not do these things. The most defining trait of these weather effects are chip damage. When Sandstorm comes into existence, every single Pokemon on the field will take damage from the Sandstorm every turn that it's active. Only 3 types are immune to Sandstorm damage: Rock, Ground, and Steel. Hail operates much the same. It also deals chip damage to everything on the field, and the only type immune to Hailstorm damage is Ice. Sand and Hail do not buff the damage of any type, but they deal this passive residual damage to the whole field at once. You could say that Sand and Hail are more defensive weather effects than Sun and Rain. These weather effects can also enable offensive strategies, but in a different way. Let's explore the competitive history of Sand and Hail teams throughout the Pokemon franchise. And of course, the all-new Snow effect, which replaced Hail in Generation 9, how that works a little bit differently. But first, don't forget to check out the makeshift Iron Mugulus plush now available for sale. Take a look at these posable arms that can be placed in such a way that Iron Mugulus looks as if he's contemplating an evil scheme of some sort. It's very funny stuff, and I hope that you do what you must with this information. Thank you. Sandstorm was actually first introduced in Generation 2. Not a lot of people realize this because it wasn't a common option. It was only set on the field with a move. Abilities didn't exist yet, so there was no Tyranitar with Sandstream in Gen 2, but you could set Sandstorm on the field if you wanted, which lasts for 5 turns. And actually there is some competitive application of this, because in Generation 2, Sandstorm deals a little bit more damage than it does in future generations. It deals 1/8 of a Pokemon's HP. This would get nerfed later, but Sandstorm deals more damage than Leftovers, actually. It deals the same amount that Burn does. So Sandstorm can sometimes be used to apply pressure, especially to Snorlax. And what's nice about Sandstorm is that it is not a status ailment, so if the Snorlax is resting, you can still deal chip damage to them and deny their Leftovers healing, even dealing more damage than their Leftovers. It only lasts for 5 turns, but that's enough to at least force out Snorlax or other walls temporarily. This does occasionally come up in high-level play. I think Sunny Day is the more commonly seen weather effect for its wall-breaking power on certain Pokemon, but you do see Sandstorm in competitive Gen 2 OU, interestingly. There's not much to say about it. It's not as if it's a weather effect you can build a whole team around. It's just a temporary damage-dealing effect that lasts for 5 turns, and that's all it is. But it's interesting that even then, it's worth using. In the very next generation though, Gen 3, Sand would go on to be the most definitive weather effect in the entire game, because Tyranitar was bestowed with this ability Sandstream, the only permanent weather setting effect in OU. Simply sending out a Tyranitar creates Sandstorm on the field for the remainder of the game. At least they had the decency to nerf the damage of Sandstorm to only 1/16. If it was still 1/8 damage, we would be in a very different world. But Tyranitar Sandstream absolutely defines Gen 3 OU. In most games, Sandstorm will be up, and the damage from Sandstorm will cancel out Leftovers healing. This has an enormous metagame impact, as anything that's not Rock, Ground, or Steel just isn't allowed to chip heal. Pokemon like Blissey, Snorlax, Celebi, Zapdos, Gengar, etc. are not very fond of Tyrannosif. Now this is one of those things that sounds really bad for a metagame, like everything has to run Leftovers to cancel out Sandstorm's chip, so basically item slots don't matter on most Pokemon. That is true and that sounds very restrictive, but in practice this accidentally creates a really balanced metagame. Because if you think about it, if Snorlax and Suicune and Blissey and all these powerful defensive blobs were given the benefit of being able to chip heal constantly, they would be so much more toxic and difficult to deal with. In the intro I said that Sandstorm can enable offensive strategies in interesting ways. This is the purest example of this, because all Sandstorm is really doing here is chip damage, but by cancelling out Leftovers healing on bulky Pokemon like Blissey and Snorlax, you are speeding up the metagame. Counterplay to chip heal was much more difficult in the very last generation. I mean, you had people manually setting Sandstorm just to temporarily stop Snorlax from eating Leftovers. Pokemon run Thief to steal leftovers, and that only works once, and you better hope that the right thing switches in on the Thief. In Gen 3, you just literally switch in a Tyranitar, and now every annoying bulky Pokemon can't chip heal anymore, all at once. And I think that ends up having a positive metagame impact, because if this was not the case, the best Pokemon would be Carmine Suicune, I think. I think Carmine Suicune would be on top of the world, and I don't think that would be very fun. Because of the ever-presence of Sandstorm, Ground is an outstanding type, and bulky Pokemon like Swampert and Claydol, even Flygon, are very prevalent and popular here, since they do have the privilege of being allowed to chip heal with leftovers. The most central of all is Skarmory, who is a Pokemon that feels like it has Magic Guard in Gen 3, kind of, even before Magic Guard existed, because it's immune to Sandstorm, Poison, and Spikes, all at once. It's dodging a lot of the central residual damage that Gen 3 is built around. But what about Hail? Remember Hail? Hail does exist in Generation 3. This is when Hail was first introduced. And Hail cannot be set by an ability like Sandstream can, but you can manually set Hail with the move Hail if you would like. For 5 turns, Hail will crash down, dealing chip damage to everything that is not an Ice type, and that's about it. Hail also makes Blizzard perfectly accurate, that's the other benefit. I have used Hail in Gen 3 before as a funny joke on the Pokemon Sneasel. I also believe the player H-Clat, a top-level Gen 3 player, once used Hail on Jinx because he thought that it buffed Ice-type damage. He then found out that it didn't later, and promptly removed it from the set. So the only times anyone has used Hail is me as a joke and H-Clat as a mistake. It's a very bad effect. It's easily replaced by Sand. There's not much synergy with it yet, and no real reason to use it. This right here is the worst that Hail has ever been. In Generation 4, Sand is still a permanent weather effect, set by the excellent Pokemon Tyranitar, and it is still the most commonly seen weather effect in the metagame. And in fact, they buffed Sand in this generation, interestingly. From Gen 4 onwards, if you are a Rock-type Pokemon specifically, you have a 1.5x special defense increase when Sandstorm is active. And wouldn't you know it, Tyranitar is a Rock-type himself, so he's setting Sandstorm and immediately receiving a special defense boost as a result. Tyranitar was already the #1 Pokemon in Generation 3, and now it just got buffed even further. Sand is central here in very much the same way. Bulky Pokemon like Jirachi and Swampert and Flygon are still very much favored for their immunity to Sandstorm chip damage. There is a bit more item variety here though, so you aren't always running leftovers on non-sand immune Pokemon. Sometimes you're running a Life Orb or a choice item instead, since they're more worthwhile in some instances. Gen 4 OU also introduced an all-new Sandstream setter, an alternative to Tyranitar if you want to set Sand on the field. The Hippo. The Hippo himself, a Pokemon that I have a bit of history with, you could say, a bit of a tumultuous history. But that's okay, we've buried the hatchet. I was blaming Hippo for things that weren't his fault, and that's all in the past now. I hereby apologize to the Hippo for what he did, and we've hashed that out in private, so don't worry. But regardless, the Hippo is also an incredibly powerful Sand setter in Gen 4, and it is favored on more defensive teams generally. Tyranitar is an excellent Pokemon, but it is weak to a lot of common types. Rock Dark is not the greatest defensive typing on the planet in some ways. It's times 4 weak to fighting, it's weak to steel, grass, water, ground. Hippowdon, on the other hand, has a simple mono-ground typing, which is much better defensively. Hippowdon also has the move Slack Off for a straightforward healing option. It's a great hazard setter, it's a great physical check to many things, and a very worthwhile and viable alternative to the previously dominant Tyranitar. And folks, in Generation 4, for the first time ever, we have a Hail setter. They released the Pokemon Abomasnow with the ability Snow Warning. On switching, this will summon permanent hail on the field. We actually have a weather effect to contend with Sand for once, when Sand was so dominant last gen. And Abomasnow is a reasonably viable Pokemon. It is not quite as good as Tyranitar or the Hippo. It's got a lot of problems, in fact. Ice Grass is a bit of a tragic typing. You're times 4 weak to fire, weak to rock, flying, so many things, honestly. Abomasnow's defensive typing is rather atrocious, but Hail is a good enough concept, especially Permahail for Abomasnow to have some application occasionally. Because Hail is a bit of an anti-meta weather effect, isn't it? So many teams in Gen 3 and 4 were built around the idea that Sandstorm is central and your ground types will be able to chip heal. Hail, on the other hand, actually deals chip damage to the steel and ground and rock types that think they should be able to ignore such chip damage. Only ice types are immune to hail, and ice types are a pretty rare type in competitive. They're not very commonly seen, because it's a bad type, frankly. It's very weak defensively. It's got a lot of problems. It's weak to Stealth Rock, which is newly introduced in Gen 4. So despite Abomasnow's horrendous typing and pretty below average stats too, honestly, with 92 attack and special attack being its crowning achievement, not very impressive, but setting Hail on the field is very disruptive to a lot of stuff. It is. And Abomasnow has an okay move pool. Leech Seed is a great option to apply a bit of pressure, especially in conjunction with Hail Chip. Ice Shard is a good stab priority move. Woodhammer for some grass stab as well. And you do have Blizzard, which you can immediately take advantage of with its Hail synergy. It's a 120 power move with 70 accuracy that cannot miss in Hail. An incredible attack in Hail. Now, I've neglected to mention this until now, but Sand and Hail both have abilities that synergize with their weather effects. They were actually extremely controversial and ended up getting banned. Those being Sand Veil and Snow Cloak, because these actually grant evasion, passive evasion in Sand or Hail. These abilities were abused for some very unfun and uncompetitive strategies, often involving fishing for dodges with mechanics like Substitute and Leech Seed and other such stalling concepts. And in Gen 4, the ban surrounding Snow Cloak is a bit of a point of drama, because it resulted in Frostlass being illegal. I won't get into all that. I don't love how they handled that, but they chose to just ban the ability Snow Cloak completely. That's how they chose to do it. But there is one other ability that can synergize with Hail in Generation 4, and that is Ice Body. Ice Body is a great ability, actually. If Hail is active, this Pokemon will gain 1/16 of their max HP each turn. They all are also immune to the Hail chip damage. That's pretty cool. It's like Rain Dish Hail version and a little bit of a Hail immunity on top. Unfortunately, nothing good gets this. You got Walrein being the chief abuser of it, which I think some pro players have tried to use Abomasnow Walrein teams. I mean, Walrein is not particularly outstanding. It's got okay HP. It's really relying on Ice Body to justify its existence, and Ice typing is really atrocious defensively. That's the main downfall of all-in Hail strategies, is that it relies on running a bunch of Ice types, which tends not to be very good for your chances of success. But still, there's something going on with Hail, and Hail sort of established itself in Gen 4 as an anti-meta weather effect, aiming to disrupt other weather effects rather than actually build around all of its synergies itself. In Generation 5, Tyranitar finally had some competition with Politoed and Ninetales, newly receiving Drizzle and Drought. Permanent rain and sun now existed. But this actually didn't keep Tyranitar down that much, and many people still think that Sand is the best of the weather effects, even with some actual competition for once in its life. Now, Gen 5 also saw the release of the new ability Sand Rush, a counterpart to Chlorophyll and Swift Swim for Sand Pokemon that grants double speed in the Sandstorm. But this is not the reason that Sand is so good, because this ability isn't even legal to use on a Sand team. All these double speed abilities are banned in Generation 5. Sand is actually just good for a similar reason to why it's good in Gen 3, for that ability to cut leftovers healing from everything and chip everything down that is not the correct type. Sand also serves to disrupt rain teams. It may seem a bit counterintuitive, but Sand often has a really good matchup against rain teams because it's great at halting all of their synergy. Rain teams rely on rain being up, obviously, and Sand not only gets rid of effects like Rain Dish and Hydration, it also nerfs the accuracy of Thunder, and it deals chip damage to all of these now vulnerable water types. A Pokemon like Tentacruel in particular gets devastated by Sand being up, as it relies heavily on chip healing, and its whole moveset is designed around chip healing as much as possible. Tyranitar is bulky. It receives special defense in the Sand and can actually stomach water type hits pretty well. Tyranitar also feels pretty universally useful in Generation 5 since it's a fantastic counter to the #1 Pokemon in the game, Latios, who is on every archetype often. You're also fantastic into the common Alakazam and Reuniclus, and can Pursuit Trap those Pokemon. So Tyranitar is doing a lot in one slot, disabling a bunch of enemy weather synergy, chipping everything down, and performing important defensive tasks. There is some Sand synergy. Excadrill has another ability besides Sand Rush, that is Sand Force. And Sand Force is an ability that grants 1.3x damage to ground, rock, and steel type attacks in the Sandstorm. This is actually Excadrill's preferred ability on Sand teams. Most of the time, even though Mold Breaker might seem better, since it can hit through Levitate, Sand Force allows Excadrill to do significantly more damage to things that would otherwise wall it, like Ferrothorn and Skarmory. It gives Excadrill some real breaking power. 1.3x damage is massive. And Ground, Rock, and Steel is pretty much all the moves Excadrill uses to begin with. There are also plenty of powerful Pokemon completely immune to Sandstorm, like Gliscor, who now has Poison Heal. This thing is an absolute menace in Gen 5 and a very difficult Pokemon to nail down and eliminate. Landorus Therian is introduced here, conveniently immune to Sandstorm. And there's also Magic Guard Pokemon. Gen 4, of course, had Magic Guard Clefable, who is still occasionally seen in Gen 5 too. But you even now have Alakazam and Reuniclus, who are very popular on Sand teams, since they can ignore that chip damage completely. The Hippo is occasionally seen in Gen 5 as an alternative Sand setter. Tyranitar is more popular here because of how well it answers Latios. But on slower-paced, stally Sand teams, you do still see the Hippo. And in Gen 5, I think Hail teams are at their most interesting, because Hail teams are pretty good here, and are even more anti-meta than they were last generation, because there's more weather effects to ruin with Hail. Not only does Snow Warning cut all Sand synergy and deal chip damage to many Pokemon that are often relying on being immune to chip damage, like Heatran or Gliscor, it also cancels out Rain and all the abilities abused by Rain. The occasional Sun team is also not having a very fun time in the Hail. Abomasnow is also a little bit nicer defensively in this metagame, I think. It's still suffering from rock weakness, but Abomasnow's grass typing comes in handy against all of those pesky water types, especially Politoed. You resist Scald and conveniently are neutral to Ice Beam, the one time a grass ice typing actually feels pretty good. So you have an entry point against Politoed that also cuts their weather. Abomasnow is also kind of a threat, weirdly, mostly because of its move pool. You've got great stab options in Blizzard and Giga Drain. You've got Focus Punch and Earthquake too, which can punish a lot of switch-ins, like a Tyranitar trying to come in and reset their Sand, or a Heatran trying to come in and hit you with Fire-type attacks. Ice Shard is also kind of useful to have a priority option against popular choices like Latios, and especially Garchomp, Gliscor, Landorus, Therian, and Dragonite, who are all very popular and all times 4 weak to Ice. And you do actually see Walrein a little bit more here. I've seen this in SPL, I swear to you. I think the idea of Walrein Stall works a little bit better here when Hail in general feels a little bit better, and so does Abomasnow. Most Hail teams I've seen don't really run too many Ice types though, even though Ice types are immune to Hail, because Ice types just suck. That's the unfortunate reality. So the strat is generally to run a lot of Magic Guard Pokemon. Reuniclus is very popular on Hail teams, especially bulky, defensive invested Reuniclus. Clefable actually sees more use on Hail teams than Sand teams, I think, as a nice utility normal type that ignores the Hail. You also see Forretress on Hail teams because Forretress has Overcoat, which grants an immunity to Hail damage, and Forretress is a nice Steel type and Rapid Spinner. It helps round out teams with a typing you usually can't really get on a Hail team, or if you do, it's going to be affected by Hail in a negative light. Hail teams in Gen 5 are quite interesting. They're mostly hard stall and aiming to just disrupt the enemy completely. It's like a control deck in a card game or something, to an extreme extent. They can often be a little bit annoying to play against because they're just shutting you down at every angle. But they are interesting, that's for sure. And this gen is probably the one where Hail and Sand feel most like adversaries to each other or counters, because Hail actually really destroys specific Sand teams. Many of them rely on like a bulky Excadrill chip healing or a Gliscor chip healing. Landorus Therian with a defensive set and leftovers. All of these things get destroyed by a simple hailstorm. Your entire game plan gets thrown out the window. In Generation 6, permanent weather was removed from the game, and all of the weather setting abilities now set temporary weather, lasting only 5 to 8 turns. Can be extended with a special rock item, but that's the best you can get. So the disruptive element of Sand and Hail, and the ability to cancel advantageous weather effects from the enemy, were less important here because weather was less of a central part of the whole format. In Gen 5, everything is all about weather. In Gen 6, you would occasionally maybe see a niche sun or rain team here and there, but Gen 6 is where weather feels like it's really not at the center of things in the same way it was in Gen 5. Mega Charizard Y does exist, but Mega Charizard Y is not enabling full sun teams. It's a temporary sun abuser utilizing the fire buff and access to solar beam for an advantage in the short term. Interestingly, in Generation 6, both Tyranitar and Abomasnow received new Mega Forms. In an attempt to maintain their viability post-weather nerf, I would maybe say. Tyranitar's Mega Form is excellent, granting a significant stat increase across the board. It has the same ability Sandstream, but interestingly, when you Mega Evolve, you can trigger Sandstream again. So if you send out Tyranitar, they send out a Politoed, you can then Mega Evolve to reset weather back. So it's like you have an extra trigger of weather in the back pocket if you want it. Tyranitar's Mega Form was quite popular as a Dragon Dance sweeper, but base form Tyranitar remained viable itself, since without consuming the 1 per team Mega Stone and having an item slot free, it could do a lot more with items like Assault Vest, Choice Scarf, or Chople Berry. Tyranitar's defensive role as a pursuit, trapper, and check to certain things also stayed as relevant as ever. Since Sand is not permanent anymore, that chip damage applying to everything in the world is not as useful, and it's not something you can go all in on building around with teammates like Gliscor and Sand Immune fellas. In the short term, you can punish certain defensive Pokemon, but Sand is definitely not what it once was in Generation 6. Fortunately though for Sand teams, you have a bit more going on in the synergy department because Sand Rush is now a perfectly legal ability to use. Now that weather is not permanent, these double speed abilities aren't really broken anymore, are they? And Sand Rush Excadrill happens to be pretty excellent alongside Tyranitar. And it helps that Excadrill is a very good and functional Pokemon even if Sand isn't up. It's got a great typing, great utility, great stab moves and such. It's a rapid spinner. So Excadrill is a very easy teammate for Tyranitar. It provides a lot of great defensive value, especially against enemies like Clefable, while also acting as a win condition with Sand Rush if you need it. This is more of a little weather synergy package rather than an all-in team. It's not like the whole team is Sand synergy. But this is a very powerful way to abuse Sand now, with Sand Rush. As for Hail, Hail really dropped off a cliff here in Generation 6. I don't think I've ever seen it used. I could be incorrect on that, but Abomasnow in its base form is really atrocious here. Hail didn't get much new. Slush Rush doesn't exist yet. The best you can get with Hail synergy is Ice Body, which is exclusively on bad defensive Pokemon. They're not doing themselves any favors with that. And there is a Mega Abomasnow now. And Mega Abomasnow is okay, I suppose, but it's pretty unimpressive compared to other Megas. It's going to be a Mega Hog. If you're running it, you really wish you were running any other Mega Evolution in the game. The ability is still Snow Warning. You still suffer from that terrible Grass Ice typing. You're not very fast. You're vulnerable to so many things. It's just not that much of a buff to Abomasnow to turn it Mega. In fact, it's detrimental because you can't run another good Mega. In Gen 7, they really attempted to throw Hail a bone. They wanted to give Hail some new tools. And they did significantly increase the viability of Hail, to be fair. They did good work here, I think. First of all, they introduced a new Hail setter, and a pretty excellent one at that, the all-new Alolan Ninetales. A popular Pokemon, a beautiful Pokemon, an Ice Fairy type with the ability Snow Warning. Now that's already quite an upgrade over Abomasnow, who is an Ice Grass type. Fairy typing makes you so much better defensively. You're now neutral to fighting, you're immune to Dragon, you have some other nice resistances, and you have Stab and Moonblast. Fairy typing is excellent, and it's much better to be an Ice Fairy type than just an Ice type or an Ice Grass type. Ninetales Alola also has pretty good speed, 109 base speed, and it has some cool new tools. It has the move Aurora Veil, which is a new Hail synergy. It's a screen effect similar to Light Screen and Reflect that only works if Hail is active. And for 5 turns, damage to all of your allies will be halved. It's basically Light Screen and Reflect in one move. This is one of the best new tools they have given to Hail teams. And this was enough to actually really buff Hail, because Aurora Veil is a fantastic enabler for offense teams. Since in a single turn you can set up basically Light Screen and Reflect in one, this enables you to get so much more setup opportunity on a boost sweeper, since you're living way more incoming hits from any source, physical or special. Alola Ninetales also has the move Freeze Dry, which is an amazing Ice-type special attack, which kind of flips the type chart on its head. Instead of Ice resisting water, it is now super effective against water. This means that Alola Ninetales matches up really well against Rain teams, because you hit all of those water types they're using super effectively. Especially Pelipper, you'll one-shot a Pelipper with Freeze Dry, you'll one-shot a Mega Swampert with Freeze Dry. This really helps you disrupt Rain teams, which rose in popularity in Gen 7 with the newly buffed Pelipper and Mega Swampert. And Ninetales even has Hypnosis for a form of sleep setting. I almost forgot to mention, they also added another Hail setter, Vanillux, the ice cream Pokemon. I literally forgot about this because it's even worse than Abomasnow, not really even worth talking about. Mono Ice typing is, believe it or not, worse than Ice Grass, because at least Ice Grass has water resistance and ground resistance, and like immunity to powder moves and stuff like that. Mono Ice is atrocious here, and the stats are very terrible. It's a new option at least, but it's not a very good one. Not a very good one. As for Sand, they're operating in Gen 7 pretty much the exact same way as they did in Gen 6. Tyranitar is just a really fundamentally strong Pokemon, and you do quite often see the Excadrill Sand Rush as a teammate. A little Sand synergy package that works well together. I will say though that Sand disrupting Rain is a bit more relevant here, as Rain rose a lot in power in Gen 7, with Pelipper existing, along with Mega Swampert, Ash, Greninja, etc. Being able to remove Rain from the field is actually very relevant and very important. So the disruptive effect of Sand felt a bit more relevant in Gen 7. Now Gen 8 OU is an interesting case, because this is perhaps the only time in the entire world where a Hail setter and a Sand setter are both ranked in OU. They're considered equals here. Tyranitar took a significant hit in Generation 8, as it lost its most crucial option, Pursuit, the option that allowed it to trap specific targets. It also lost its Mega Form, as did everything. But Tyranitar held onto OU viability. It did drop for a bit in Gen 8, but it clawed its way back because of the fundamental strength it's always had, the special defense boost in the Sand that it itself sets, the great stats, the great move pool, and it's also pretty nice into popular Pokemon like Dragapult and Blacephalon. It's effective as a Choice Band wall breaker. And the Excadrill synergy is very nice here. There is more Sand synergy to be had, as Dracozolt is a new Pokemon, a very interesting Sand Rush Pokemon. This is an electric dragon type, so not even a sand-oriented type, like Ground Rock or Steel. A very novel design, a very cool design, I think. It's a weak Pokemon on the stats side, only 100 attack, but it has the interesting option of Bolt Beak, which doubles in power if you move first. If you have Sand Rush, you of course get that massive speed boost, so this is granting Dracozolt a huge electric type nuke in Sand. An incredibly unique approach to a Sand threat that is actually quite nice. This is a UUBL ranked Pokemon, but it's a viable choice, and it can be an incredible threat in the metagame on the right team and in the right circumstance. It is relying heavily on Bolt Beak for its damage output, though. It has some other options, you know, Fire Blast and Draco Meteor for some special coverage. Usually it needs a Life Orb to make up for its lower stats. The plan with Dracozolt is often to lure in their bulky ground type, like their Landorus Therian or Excadrill or Garchomp, and when they're expecting an electric hit, maybe hit them with a Draco Meteor instead for big neutral damage or super effective damage on Garchomp. Other Pokemon can also lure in those and try to chip them down so Dracozolt can sweep later. Definitely a noteworthy new option for the Sand archetype. And in Generation 8, Hail teams might be the best they've ever been. It's actually a pretty viable strategy. Not only because Alola Ninetales is really solid, and a lot of the stuff removed from the game in Gen 8 benefited Ninetales Alola by proxy. It's worried about less stuff, it matches up better into the metagame in general. But also there's actually a good Hail abuser now. A new Slush Rush Pokemon that is really frightening. Because this is a Slush Rush Pokemon with Electric Ice Stab, and Electric Ice is literally the best offensive combination in all of Pokemon. It's a similar Pokemon to Dracozolt. It also has Bolt Beak, but it has Blizzard, which of course can't miss in the Hail. This is a fantastic mixed threat with Bolt Beak on the physical side, Blizzard, and Freeze Dry on the special side. And this thing tears apart teams that rely on their bulky ground type, because you are one-shotting Landorus, Therian, and Garchomp, and Bolt Beaking everything else for double power. And the fact that everything is getting chipped by the Hail in the process, and you have Aurora Veil here, which enables other offensive teammates, means that Hail has a lot of tools that move towards a really functional offensive archetype. If you haven't played much Gen 8 OU, I would actually urge you to try a Hail team. It's a good starting team. There's this team from the samples thread by Airfare, and you can see how Hail not only enables the Arctozolt, who is a fantastic speedy threat with maybe the best stab combination in the whole game, but Aurora Veil also enables all of these nice boost sweepers like this Dragon Dance Dragapult, Swords Dance Garchomp, and Swords Dance Scizor. You don't really see teams like this in any other gen, this kind of Hail offense. I think it's a really unique part of Gen 8 OU. It's really cool. And now in Generation 9, the Hail weather effect has been completely reworked to an all-new weather effect called Snow. And Hail's most defining characteristic for most of this video has been its chip damage. But Snow completely cuts that aspect. There is no chip damage in the Snow. Instead, the benefit of Snow is that Ice types gain a defense boost, just like how in Sand, Rock types gain a special defense boost. So this is an attempt to buff Ice defensively. But overall, I think that the weather effect ends up feeling worse because the chip damage was an important aspect. It was a very important aspect. Alolan Ninetales is still in the game in Generation 9, and it had its time of OU viability. In earlier metagames where now banned offensive threats could abuse Aurora Veil for setup opportunities, especially Pokemon like Volcarona. Now Alolan Ninetales is ranked all the way down in NU tier, which is a significant drop-off from being OU just last generation. What a massive downgrade. Alolan Ninetales does enjoy the fact that it can immediately receive that Snow defense boost, but basically the only reason to use Alolan Ninetales was for Aurora Veil, and that kind of screen-setting hyper-offense strategy simply isn't as good in the current metagame. There is a new Slush Rush abuser, and that is Satitan, a pretty interesting Pokemon. Satitan is a mono-ice type with Slush Rush, and a massive HP stat of 170, a very strange Pokemon, with an astronomically high HP stat, okay attack, and terrible everything else. It's also got Belly Drum and Ice Shard and Play Rough as a coverage. I think it gets Earthquake, yeah, so it's got some interesting offensive tools. I think the HP is aiming to help it set up, and in Snow it has a defense boost too. So it was definitely designed around the new Snow mechanic. Not a very functional guy in practice though. Vulnerable to so many common priority moves, and even with the help from its high HP stat and the defense boost, it's still difficult for this guy to set up. It is still very frail in practice. So this guy's all the way down in NUBL, regrettably. Snow got one other tool though, and this is their best new tool. Chilly Reception is an all-new weather setting move on Slowking and Galarian Slowking. This is a move that sets Snow on the field and then pivots you out. It allows you to switch out. And this is a fantastic move. Just to be able to pivot alone is really good on a bulky regenerator Pokemon like Galarian Slowking. This was a huge buff for Galarian Slowking. And the fact that it sets Snow on the field as well is icing on the cake. This allows you to override another weather effect from a Sun or a Rain team and cancel their synergy, which is very nice. And if you happen to be running an Ice type, they get a defense boost and some other benefits like a perfectly accurate Blizzard. A common Pokemon to help get a bit of a Snow synergy package is Kyurem, as Kyurem loves the defense boost to help it set up Dragon Dance and just for general usefulness. It also loves the perfectly accurate Blizzard on Choice Spec sets or other Breaker Kyurem sets. So that's a fun little way to use Snow. This is one of the better move designs of Gen 9 in my opinion. A new way to be a weather setter that is a bit more proactive. It's much better than just setting the weather itself and then having to switch out on the next turn. That's clunky. This allows you to chilly reception and then go straight to the guy that can abuse it, or just pivot out, giving the move more flexibility than just being a weather move. Maybe we'll see such an idea return in future games for other weather effects like rain, sun, or sand. But regrettably, sand has fallen off a cliff completely in Generation 9 as Tyranitar is no longer even ranked in OU, falling down for the first time in its long career. This was a tragic moment for a lot of Tyrannisif superfans. I'm still coming to terms with it myself, but it's all true. Tyranitar's usefulness as an offensive threat with a vast move pool just isn't as good anymore in this higher power creep world. It's struggling against the all-new Great Tusk, who really punishes it with its ground fighting typing. You really don't love the fact that Zamazenta is now a Pokemon in the metagame, a big bulky fighting type offensive guy. That's no fun for Tyranitar. The metagame is very unkind to Tyranitar in general. No pursuit to trap stuff. You at least get knockoff now, but that's the best thing Tyranitar got, and it wasn't enough. Sand synergy is also much worse, as Excadrill dropped to UU as well. It really doesn't help that Gen 9 released the Pokemon Iron Treads, who has exactly the same typing as Excadrill, but higher stats, better options overall, access to booster energy, and it's also a rapid spinner. So Iron Treads kinda does what Excadrill does, but better, and booster energy can be used for a speed boost temporarily, which is way easier to use and more flexible than requiring a Sand Setter to activate Sand Rush. Excadrill is really lagging behind, and it's not a powerful enough threat on its own merits to sweep everything. So many common things just stop Excadrill in its tracks completely. So Sand is maybe the worst and least relevant weather effect in Gen 9, which is kind of insane to say, once the most central and metagame defining weather effect in the entire game is now the worst. Even Snow is more commonly seen and more relevant because of Kyurem and Soiking Galar and Ninetales in the past. Sun is, of course, at its absolute peak with all these photosynthesis Pokemon. And Rain sucks, but I think that the fact that you have Pelipper and Swift Swim and other synergies gives Rain more merit than Sand. Sand has nothing here. Sand has never been worse. So as you can see, Sand and Hail and Snow as well, the new version of Hail, have a very different identity to that of Sun and Rain, often defined by their disruptive nature, the ability to punish a lot of Pokemon at once just by setting the weather. When permanent weather was removed from the franchise, these weather effects aimed to be more about having one or two Pokemon that synergize with their weather effect, like a Sand Rush or Slush Rush Pokemon. I think they've done a pretty good job in Gen 7, 8, and 9 of trying to make Hail more relevant, historically the weaker of the weather effects, introducing Ninetales Alola and Arctozolt in Gen 8, and now the Snow rework. They're clearly trying to give this weather effect a bit more identity. And it does seem like Sand is lagging behind now, with less attention towards it, because it was so good for so long. And maybe we'll see what they choose to do in Gen 10 with Sand. Maybe there'll be all new ways to utilize Sand that we can't even dream of at the moment. What do you think of the Sand and the Hail and the Snow weather effects in the Pokemon series, folks? Which of them is your favorite? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.